Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah, and today is part 2 in my Houseplants for Beginners series. So as you can probably tell from the title, today's video is going to be all about understanding lighting for plants and how to figure out where to place those plants in your house for the best chance of success. Before I jump into it, if you are new here, welcome. If you want more information about taking care of houseplants and anything houseplant related, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you can be notified every time I post a new video. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into today's video. So the first question that somebody that is just getting into houseplants might be asking is how to tell what kind of light a houseplant needs. Now, there are tons of videos out there that are explaining maybe the light requirements for a specific group of plants, maybe how to look at a plant and tell what the light requirements might be, but I'm going to just go ahead and give some quick advice and some generalities today. Please keep in mind, and I will mention this several times throughout the video, that lighting may vary a little bit region to region and also based on the time of year. So again, I'm just speaking kind of in generalities here. Now, the easiest way to tell the best lighting for your plant is going to be using the resources that you already have at your fingertips. If you're getting it in a store, there might be a little tag, although I generally say that those kind of just, they kind of throw something on there, especially if you're getting at a big box store, so don't trust that word as law. If you're getting it from a smaller nursery or ordering it online, they might give you some requirements online. They often will tell you what kind of light requirements there are. If you're at a local nursery, talk to somebody, see if they have any recommendations. You also can do a quick YouTube or Google search. Most plants have some care guides out there, and it might be kind of generalities. So you might have to look up lighting for Hoyas or lighting for Monsteras. Sometimes you'll find instructions for specific plants because that might vary from Hoya to Hoya or Monstera to Monstera. But in general, you can often find information on the type of light that Hoyas might prefer, the type of light that maybe a Calathea might prefer, those kinds of things. Keep in mind that often lighting is referred to kind of within a range, and a plant might be able to do well within a certain range of lighting, right? So if something is growing up a tree, as it's starting out, it can do really well in that lower light, but as it grows and as it moves up the trunk, it's pushing for the light. It's going through some of the leaves. It's maybe getting a little bit brighter light. So very often plants might do well in a sort of range of lighting, and that might be why you're getting some different information on different sites. Also, keep in mind that lighting varies location to location, right? The lighting that I have here in Colorado is not the same lighting that somebody might be getting in Florida, and it might be a little bit different than what people are getting in Seattle, right? So what's bright light to me might be medium light to somebody else and might be actually really, really bright light to somebody else. So my general recommendation would be to look online to try to find some generalities, right? Where are people placing, what kind of light are people placing their plants in? But use that as a starting point. You may have to change a little bit and find that your plants in your home prefer a little brighter or less bright light. So you've gone ahead and looked up what kind of light your plant prefers, but maybe you don't quite understand what each of these terms means. They can be a little bit vague. I like to think of them as like party dress codes, right? That what is cocktail attire to me might be semi-formal to somebody else, right? So lighting kind of is a little bit of a range, but I will do my best to kind of give you some generalities about what each type of light might mean for you. So we'll start with the very brightest, which would be direct light, which is the type of light your plant would be getting if it was outside in the sun on a sunny day. This is usually the type of light that outdoor or fruiting or vegetable plants prefer. So they're looking for very, very high amounts of light for many, many hours of the day. Most houseplants are not going to prefer that kind of light, maybe with the exception of some succulents, some desert plants. As you might imagine, they probably get quite a bit of direct, bright light when they are in the desert. But for the most part, your plants are going to prefer something a little more indirect. Now, some of my plants tend to get a little bit of direct light, so sometimes you may hear me refer to in a video that it gets mostly bright indirect light with a little bit of morning or evening direct light. And that is, again, certainly an option. So like my Hoyas do really well in an east-facing window. I have a huge tree outside that window. So as it's getting that direct light in the mornings. It's actually coming filtered through the leaves for the better part of the morning. So that is direct light. I think it's pretty self-explanatory when it's getting the direct rays of the sun shining directly on it. The next category that you might hear quite frequently is bright indirect light. So this is just about the brightest light you can get this plant without having the sun shining directly on it. It may still be in a windowsill, and I usually think of this as anything that's close to an east, south, or west facing window. Now, if it's directly pressed up in that window, it might be getting some direct light. Again, my Hoyas get a little direct light through the day, but if it's just a few feet back from that window, it's probably getting bright indirect light. Now, this might change based on your location. If you live somewhere where it is overcast quite often, or you live in an apartment in a big city and there are buildings blocking the way, that might change the quality of how bright that indirect light is. But in general, that is just a few feet away from either an east, south, or west facing window. I've also heard bright indirect light referred to in the sense that you could easily read a book in that light. You would not feel any need at all to add any supplemental light. It is really bright. You can see everything clearly. Again, it's probably the brightest light that you can provide without having it directly getting the rays of the sun. The next step down from that is going to be your medium light. So this would start maybe in a north-facing window, again, depending on where you live. Where I'm at, I don't have any north-facing windows, but if I were to have a north-facing window in this house, it would be, again, I could see the sky. I don't have anything really close to me. I don't have any really close neighbors. So I'd be getting pretty much unobstructed north-facing light. That I would consider medium light. I would also probably say anything that's significantly back from the window is also probably getting medium light. So the Monstera behind me is probably somewhere between bright indirect and medium light. I get tons and tons of light in this room, but it's a little bit further back from the window. It's probably a good 10 feet back from any of the windows, so it's never getting anything close to direct sunlight. Medium light might also be what you would expect to get on a bright but overcast day, right? So it's, again, kind of diffused. It's not quite bright enough. Maybe it's right on that edge. If we're talking about the book analogy again, you might start considering a little supplemental light. It's like right on that edge. You're like, should I turn on a light? Should I not turn on a light? I don't know. That's kind of that medium light range. And then the very last category would be low light. Now I'm going to clarify here, low light does not mean no light. So it's a room that probably has a very little tiny bit of light. For example, my guest bathroom has a very small window that is south facing, but it's under an overhang. So it gets very little light. If I'm going to do anything in that bathroom, even if it's the middle of the day, I'm going to go ahead and flip on a light, whether I'm going to read a book or I'm going in there to touch up my makeup or whatever. I need that supplemental light. It's not quite enough to do anything. Most plants, even if they say low light, would probably prefer closer to the medium light, but there are some plants that do really well in low light. And I have a video talking all about those plants. I'll go ahead and link that for you. So if you have maybe an office space or somewhere that's not getting quite as much light as the rest of your house, that's kind of going to be that low light situation. And there are tons of plants that will do okay in that particular space. So I'm not going to get into which plants are going to do best in each of those types of lights in this video. It would be so long if I did that. But if you want a video about a specific type of plant and what kind of lighting it requires, I could definitely do that and maybe encompass it in a full care for Hoyas or philodendrons or monsteras type of video. So next up, I thought I would talk about how to tell if your plant needs an adjustment in light, right? So like I said, you're using some of these guidelines as a starting point. So if the internet tells you a plant prefers bright indirect light, you're going to use that as a starting point and maybe place it close to a window, getting some bright light, and then you're going to adjust from there. So I wanted to start with how to tell if your plant is getting too much light. This is something that's probably going to take a couple of weeks, but you will definitely start to notice some very obvious signs that your plant is getting too much light. So plants, very much like people, end up getting sunburned, and I do have a sunburned Hoya here. This is my Hoya pubicalyx Royal Hawaiian Purple. And you can see I've had this in this east-facing window for a while, and it is getting sun-stressed leaves, and that is an okay thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing for the plant. It's just a preference of mine. I like the way these leaves look. But you can see one of these older leaves down here, and hopefully you can see that. It is turning this kind of yellow color and getting a little bit wrinkly. So that to me is a sign that it's getting a little bit too much light and it's getting sunburned. Now, if this happens to one or two leaves, you can tell some of these leaves up here on the top are doing perfectly fine. So one or two leaves may be a sign that you think about moving it back from the window a little bit. It's not going to necessarily kill the plant if it has one or two sunburned leaves. It's just aesthetically, it doesn't look really great. But if after a couple of weeks of a plant being close to the window, you notice some sort of bleaching like that, where they look healthy, they just look a little bit pale or yellow, right? Kind of like that. Or they're a lighter green than maybe you anticipated they would be. That's a sign that maybe you should think about pulling it back from the window and not getting it quite as much light. So how do you tell if your plant is a little bit too far away from the window and it needs to move a little bit closer? There's a couple signs that you can look for. If it's just barely outside of its proper range, it may just be stagnant or growing very, very slowly. Now, a lot of this will depend on the type of plant that you have, what its growth rate naturally is. But for me, I'm again going to use my Hoyas as an example. If I notice that my Hoya is growing really, really slowly, it's been several weeks and it hasn't put on any new leaves, or it's not even showing any signs of putting on new leaves, that's a sign to me that the light I was giving it was sufficient and it wasn't going to die in that location, but also it could probably use a little bit more in order to produce that new growth. If you have a variegated plant, you might notice that it starts to put out a little bit less variegation. Now, I do want to specify here that most variegation is a mutation, it's in the stem, and it's not going to affect it hugely. But if it's not getting quite enough light, the plant might try to force out a little bit extra green growth so that it's getting more chlorophyll so that it can get a little bit more of the energy that it needs. So if your plant is variegated and you notice that it's starting to give you a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less, again, maybe think about putting it in the light and seeing if that will help with the variegation. Now, if it's really outside of its ideal zone and it's way too dark of conditions, you might notice a couple of things. One would be it's not drying out. The soil is staying wet for way too long. That's just a sign that it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's not doing that whole process of photosynthesis. And so it doesn't need as much water. And so it's going to stay wet for probably weeks. So this is something to watch out for if you've brought a new plant home and you gave it what you thought was the proper amount of water and you think it's in the right kind of soil and it's still not drying out. It might just need a little bit more light so that it's using a little bit more of the water. You may also notice some yellowing of the leaves. Now, yellow leaves can mean a multitude of things, including over or under watering. But if you're noticing them, especially on one side of the plant, so I'll use my Hoya as an example again. So if I noticed that it's sitting and this is the side that's facing the window and this is the side that's not facing the window, and all of these are starting to turn yellow and kind of mushy and falling off, that's going to be a sign to me that this side right here isn't getting enough light. And lastly, I wanted to talk about a couple of ways that you might contemplate changing the lighting in your house if you feel like it's not working for you. Now, this could be a full video in and of itself, so I'm just going to touch briefly on these things. If you feel like you're not getting enough light, whether that's in a specific area in your house or just in general, I know some YouTubers, they get great light in the summertime and not so great light in the wintertime, so they use it as a supplement during certain times of year. So grow lights are going to be your answer in that particular situation. There's lots of variety within grow lights. There's lots of different types that you can get. There's lots of different ways that you can use them. And if you guys want a full video on different types of grow lights and how to use them and other things like that, please let me know. Like I said, that could be a full video in and of itself, but I wanted to mention that if you feel like you're not getting enough light, grow lights is a way that you can supplement what you might need in your home. The opposite of that would be if you have an area that is great for plants, but you feel like it's getting too much light. So people that live in really, really sunny, bright locations, I'm kind of in that situation. I know people who live in places like Arizona or other bright locations like that might also be in the same situation. So if you're in that particular situation, you feel like your plants are getting sunburned, you can't really move them that much further away from the window without getting them not enough light. There are sheer curtains that you can put up. I don't have any in my home. I just kind of move my plants around as needed, but that's another great idea, that you can put up a sheer curtain that will cut the amount of direct light that you're getting and still give it that bright, indirect, diffused sort of light. So like I said, I could talk more about each of those things, but I just wanted to mention, just because you don't have the perfect lighting in your home doesn't mean you can't adjust it just a little bit one way or the other. So hopefully you guys found this video somewhat helpful. I know those are just kind of the basics on lighting. Hopefully if you're just starting out with plants, these will give you some ideas, somewhere to start from. It's going to take a little bit of experimenting to get things right, but it's always nice to have somewhere that you're starting from. If you did find this video helpful, be sure to leave me a thumbs up letting me know that you liked it. And if you have any questions that I didn't answer, go ahead and leave those in the comments down below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you with another video very soon. Bye.